You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, the word for today is roadmap. We're going to have a discussion about a new and best-selling leadership roadmap that you may want to pay attention to. Hang with us. Hi, everybody. This is Doug, and we're back on Leadership Powered by Common Sense. My guest today is a gentleman who has a very successful book that's being distributed. His name is Jim Carlough, and he's going to talk to us about the leadership roadmap that he has created and is propagating out in the world. Jim, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I think our conversation today should resonate very, very well with your audience.
I hope so. That's why we're here. But Jim, it's a little bit of a tradition on this show to give a quick backstory of your journey that taught you the life lessons that you're now using to help others. What say you on that?
Well, you used a key word, life lessons. My view on leadership is people are not born leaders, they're developed. And it's those life experiences that help people round out that leadership skill set. And you acquire that through mentors and watching other leaders, etc. And there's not really a good book or roadmap to follow that I've ever found. And in mentoring people the last 25 years, I have found consistently that new leaders struggle with some of the softer skills that nobody ever taught them. We have a bad habit in taking an individual contributor who's been a superstar, anointing them and saying, "Hey, congratulations, Doug, we're going to make you a manager." And they, shake your hand, give you a pay raise, give you a new title, but they don't tell you how to handle people.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of leaders struggle with that. So that was really so when I sat down 2 years thinking about what am I going to do when I retire, I certainly can't go fishing every day. That's my DNA isn't wired for that. So I thought, maybe it's time I put pen to paper and then start educating people on how I lead and what people have taught me over the years. And, from a DNA perspective, if you look at my family history, my dad was a carpenter, his dad was a mason, and my great-grandfather was a chicken farmer.
Yeah.
There's no CEO, COO, CSO in any of those. And so you're looking at an individual who truly not only walks the talk, but developed their leadership style through active engagement with people and learnings along the way.
Yeah, I agree with you totally on that premise that we have a weird tradition in modern business to take a high-performing individual contributor and poof, we make them a manager. And I'm not sure where that logic began. I guess there's some merit to that because if you're looking at a frontline scenario, you are focused on execution and delivery. So, yeah, I guess that makes a little bit of sense. But on day one, that individual that has now been elevated is challenged with those soft skills, like you say. And I call it the blend of the art and science of leadership. And the science side of leadership is not just about technical expertise and knowledge, although that can be an element depending on what level you are. But there's so much more to it that people get into. And it sounds like, well, let's start. Show us the book and tell us the title.
The title of the book is The 6 Pillars of Effective Leadership, a Roadmap to Success.
Okay. Well, let's dive right in. Run off real quick. Name us your 6 pillars.
So the 6 pillars. The number 1 pillar, which is non-negotiable to me, is integrity. That's followed by compassion and empathy, which to me are 2 different things, followed by focus and stability. And then the last one is humor. Now, I know people are going to sit there and say humor, and I want to clarify. I'm not suggesting that a leader has to be a stand-up comedian at the water cooler, but there's times where a little bit of humor will humanize the leader and take some pressure off of the people in the room because they sense that, okay, this guy's not so stuffy as we thought. He's real like us. And that's what I mean by that. And I've used humor to interrupt stressful situations where people can't come to agreement on things. I've used humor to kick off meetings. I've used humor in one-on-one sessions when I'm counseling somebody and giving them feedback, sometimes also reverting to a funny story. One of the things, unfortunately, in our society today, everybody's so hypersensitive that they're easily offended. So when I use humor, it's usually self-deprecating humor on something that I did that was stupid or funny that anybody could laugh at. Because you certainly don't want to be telling a joke that may be off color that somebody's going to be offended to today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting framework there. So there's 6 pillars, and it does remind me when I work with my coaching clients, and any of those who are listening today are going to relate to this. We have a dialogue about, if you're going to be a leader, you need a framework. You need, if you've never thought about it, even if you've been in a management seat for a while, chances are you have never sat down and committed your own time to defining your principles and pillars of leadership, the things you really want to stand for and represent, and essentially the definition of how you want to show up. And you've already used the word DNA, and I think that's a good one too, because we all are wired a little bit differently, and a framework that works for one person may not work for somebody else. And I can imagine. I mean, not to be contrarian here, but your 6 pillar on humor. By the way, I agree with that. I love that idea. There will be some that say, I can't tell a joke. I don't know. I'm not spontaneous. I'm not funny. Okay, X, I can't put that in my framework. And guess what, guys? That's okay. You can, it is the classic, you do you, you decide. But I think what we're talking about here still, nonetheless, in your list, there are some very valuable things to consider and very important elements. So let's kind of go back, Jim, and let's start at the top and break it down a little further from your perspective of how those elements play into effective leadership.
And to do that, I'll use some stories as well, because I like the storytelling aspect of it, because it also will tell the audience it wasn't something I was born with, but I learned, and here's where or how I learned it. So let's start with integrity. So for integrity, I have to go back to the year I graduated college, which was 1983. And shortly after graduating college, I ran for a local political office in the town I grew up in. So at the age of 23, I was elected as a city councilman. I was also reelected 3 years later, which said I did something right. And right after the election, the city manager called me and he asked me if I could come in and visit with him. Not knowing what he wanted to talk about, I sat down and we had a good chat for about 20 minutes. And then he said to me, he said, Jim, he said, you're going to do really well because you're smart. You think with your head first. You don't just jump to conclusions. But I want to ask you to do me a favor. And he said to me, when you lay down to go to sleep at night, right before you close your eyes, I want you to ask yourself one question. And that question is, did I do anything today for my own personal benefit that was at the expense of another individual, group of individuals, or organization? He said, if you say yes to that question, before you can sleep, you need to figure out whether you can unwind what you did. And number 2, you need to figure out how to never do it again. Do you know, ever since that day in November of 1983, I have asked myself that question every night.
I love
Every
it.
single night.
Yeah, yeah. Somewhere in my mind, when you started that story, I thought, he was going to describe the under the table handling and dealing that was going on, and but quite the contrary. That reminds me of a senior executive in banking that I worked for in my early banking days. And when we would go to him to kind of preview a deal that we were contemplating, he would listen to the data and some of the financial aspects of it, but then he would say, to your knowledge, is there anything about this deal that is immoral or illegal? And those words stuck with me, ever since that. It was just kind of cutting through all the noise and getting to the basics. So, as you can imagine, that question alone killed several deals along the way that would come to us in banking. We as bankers, we didn't like to do pawn shop financing. We didn't, there was a fundamental, however legitimate the operation might be, there was just a fundamental taint to that we didn't like, and we wouldn't finance them. They had to go down the street to another bank. We didn't want to have that associated with our name. So integrity
And
is a great one.
yeah, and to me, if you can walk down that center line and not waver with that, not only can be highly successful, but you'll actually have a much more loyal and dedicated team when you're open and honest with them and direct with them, and they understand that they're getting the straight scoop. And you're going to go down this path together with me. And I've been blessed because in my 30 plus years here in business, I've had a number of people who've wanted to come back to work with me over and over again. And because they know what they're going to get.
Hmm.
And it's amazing that when I go out and I talk at corporations or I talk at colleges, the number of people who come up to me afterwards and tell me about the boss from heck that they happen to work for, whether it's in a coffee shop or in an office situation. And it really it makes me feel bad that these bad bosses exist. But
Right.
and they've
Right.
always existed, but it's just and to me that's why I think more than ever we need integrity in our world, not just in business, but everywhere around us. I think we've gotten away from the golden rule and all of the things that we were raised on by our parents.
Well, and to your point, I think there's an important distinction that has to be made. It's one thing to put that value on a piece of paper and say, yeah, that's what I want to do, but it's a whole different thing to go out there, walk it, talk it, and do it day by day, and really create undeniable proof that you live by that principle.
Absolutely, absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And somebody asked me not long ago, they said, Jim, when does leadership begin for you? Is it when you get to the office and you sit behind your desk? And I looked at them and I said, no, leadership begins when my feet hit the floor when I get up in the morning, because everything that I'm going to do from that moment on has an impact on someone, whether it be my family or a coworker or somebody that works on my team or whoever. And so to me, leadership is a 24/7 job.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, let's go to the next principle. What's in the next pillar?
So let's talk empathy. And I'm going to use a story that sort of combines empathy and compassion. But because they are close, in my definition, with compassion, you can solve a problem for somebody. With empathy, you can only help them with the problem. You can't help them solve it. But this was a situation where I worked for a technology company from 1999 to 2008. And I had numerous teams that reported to me, and one was a team that was in charge of engineering and supporting clients who were on a piece of old green screen technology. Now, you probably have some listeners out there that don't know what green screen technology is, but you and I remember those days when computers were first coming out and becoming usable at home, et cetera. You didn't have a mouse. But we were replacing this technology with Windows-based technology, and we had probably 25 or 30 clients that were on that platform, and we were going to sunset that platform and slowly convert the clients over. So I had to tell a team of 25 people that their jobs were going away, but that I didn't know when their job would go away because it would depend on the clients they're supporting and when they would convert. And so the shortest amount of time of notice people would get was probably 6 or 7 months, but they could also have gotten 12 or 14 months for a longer type project. And I really wrestled with, I didn't know what to tell them to not make them update their resume and run out the door. Because my first thought was, if my boss tells me my job's going away, I'm checked out mentally and I'm posting my resume all over the place and I'm now 100% looking for a job. So my goal was keep everybody on that team until the very last second and then let them go and then have something set up for them. So after about a week of stressing through this, I went to them and I told them three things. The first thing I told them was, this process of converting people is going to take time. I will give you my word that I will give you as much time as feasibly possible. Now, if a customer sends us a 30-day termination letter, I don't control that. But if we're converting somebody to a new platform, we have some control of that, and I can predict when it is that your job would potentially go away. So that was the first thing I told them or promised them. The second thing I promised them was that if anyone wanted to learn the new technologies and how we were supporting those clients, how we were developing those products, if you're an engineer or whatever, I would make the training available during the work day, during that transition period when you are converting from where you are today to the new technology, so that when the day comes, you can then go join that team. The third thing I promised them was, if you don't want to convert and stay here and work for the company any longer, I will help you on the outside of this organization find a job that's fitting for you, that meets the financial needs of your family. By the end of the 3 years, nobody left before it was their time to transition or leave. Nobody. But about a year later, I get a call from HR and they want to come and see me. Now, of course, when you get a call from HR, all things start running through your head. Where's the empty box? They're going to come in with an empty box. So they came down and two people sat in front of me and they said, we need to talk to you about your group in Oakland. And I went, oh boy, that's the team. And I said, what's the problem? And they said, well, we did an employee satisfaction survey a couple of months ago. Do you remember that? I said, yes. And they said, and you're downsizing that department and letting people go, correct? I said, yes. They said, but we don't understand why they're the happiest people in the 20,000 employees that we have here at our company. And I had to think about that. I wasn't expecting to do anything other than to keep people as long as I could to support our clients. But in reality, in retrospect, I took all the worry away from them. I gave them all a pathway, whether they wanted to stay or go, and committed myself to assisting them. So when they went home, they didn't have to go home and say, hey, my job's going away, I'm going to be unemployed. They could go home and say, hey, my job may be going away, but here's the path for me to stay there and what I need to do, or Jim's going to help me get a job. And sometimes the unexpected happens,
Yeah.
and you realize the impact that you've had on 25 families.
Well, what's going through my mind is the antithesis of the unintended consequence. You were contemplating the worst for each of those, specifically the impact it would have on your department if people took early exits because of the news. And yet, you created retention there and had everybody hang with you and successfully complete that transition. And by the way, I remember those days very well. I did a couple of those green screen conversions myself, and it is a whole different meaning of green screen. So good. Well, let's move on. Let's do the next one.
So let's talk about focus. So when I think about focus, I think about an individual who's laser-like on a singular goal or entity. And so one of the things that makes my book a little bit different is in each chapter, when I talk about the pillar, I will also talk about how you can implement that pillar, but I also give you professional references of people that people will know that emphasize and use that pillar in their management style. So when I think of focus, I think of Jeff Bezos in his early days. When Amazon was first started, he sold books out of his garage. But he then, as he started to convert into consumables and eventually grocery store stuff, Amazon had a very bad customer service reputation. And some would say they still suffer from some of that. But Jeff knew that he had to get in the middle of it in order to fix it. And this is a true story. He took a desk and put a desk in the center of the customer service department. This was before they were nationwide like they are today with massive plants everywhere. But he put that chair there and he sat there for 6 months with laser-like focus to see how everything worked, what they were doing. And he said he was going to fix it, and he did. He didn't want his leaders to do it. He felt it was so important that it required him to physically move his desk and go in and sit in the middle of that customer service department every day.
Mm-hmm.
And in 6 months, he had it turned around.
I can add to that. I've had a couple of guests on my show that have been very senior executives with Amazon, and we've done a little bit of myth busting with those guests. There's some urban lore about Amazon, true or false, that's out there, and these guys helped us, go through some of that. But one of the issues is customer service, and to your point, to this day, Amazon asks the customer question on everything they contemplate, every new initiative, every new product, every new offering that they're looking at. And to give you an idea of how extreme they are on the customer service mindset, or customer experience, I think is the better word for it. They now, being the behemoth they are, they have sway and influence. And classic story, if you go to a Walmart or a toy store and buy a toy for your kid, it's probably in one of these heavy plastic shrink wrap packages that takes some industrial tin snips to break through and open up, and it's sharp edges, and it's dangerous to open a kid's toy. Bezos told his suppliers, "You got to get rid of those packages. We're not going to do that to our customers. You can put it in bubble wrap in a box, and we'll take care of it from there." And it's not 100% implemented, but for some of the more major product lines, they're doing it. When you order those same goods, you're going to get a different packaging that isn't that tough to deal with, dangerous plastic stuff that classically was used in packaging. So, yeah, that focus carries on still today for sure.
Yeah.
Let's move on for the sake of time here. Let's move on. We got a couple more to cover in your roadmap.
So let's talk about stability. So when I talk, and some people have said, but Jim, isn't stability and focus kind of the same thing? They're similar, but they're not the same, because laser-like focus could be like in the Jeff story on customer service. But stability is really how you operate day in and day out. And when I think of somebody who epitomizes the classic absolutely stability because he's always the same, is Warren Buffett. You never see Warren Buffett agitated. Unfortunately, he's going to retire, and I'm going to have to find another person to start quoting or referencing. But the reality is, ever since he bought his first stock at the age of 12, all he has done is repeated the same process over and over and over again. And as he transitions out of his role, he could probably transition in a 3-hour meeting, because his organization knows everything he's going to do and how they're going to need to run it when he's no longer there and he's officially retired. And so when I think about stability, I think about ensuring that my team sees my behavior and my actions consistently the same. They're not seeing Jim fly off the wall, Jim get agitated, throw a book down or whatever. They get the same, there are things that upset me, but I don't allow my team to see that. And what they see is they see someone who's consistently doing the same thing. In fact, I had two women that worked for me at one point back in about 2010, and one worked for the other. One was the manager, one was an employee, individual contributor, and they were having this disagreement outside my office, and I could tell it was getting heated. And so I walked out and I said, "Ladies, can I help you?" Well, we're trying to solve a problem, and I'm right, and she's wrong, and I'm right, and she's wrong. And so I said, "Come on, and let's go sit down and talk about it." So we sat down, we started to talk about it. I got them to relax and get some of the emotion out of it. And the reality of the argument was they both had a solution, but they couldn't see the forest through the trees, that if they had combined the solution, it would have been the perfect result for the customer because it would have fixed the issue, but it also would have prevented it from ever recurring again. And so I said to them, I said, "You know what I really think? I think you're both right. And here's why I think you're both right. Person A, you didn't think about the long term, and person B, you didn't think about the short term. But if you put those two things together, you've got the perfect result." And they both looked at me, and the one woman got a little emotional and started to tear up. And I said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Did I say anything to offend you?" She said, "No." She said, "I'm upset because you're always right."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I said, "But that didn't make you cry." And she said, "I'm upset that we didn't see this. I'm upset with myself. I'm crying because I should have been able to see that we were in tandem. We had a better solution than we did separately." And so they both learned a lesson that day.
Yeah. Yeah. That's similar to sage words I got from one of my mentors in the early days. His mantra was, "The truth is in the middle." And when inevitably when two people were at odds in our organization, he would do the same thing, but he would remind them of that mantra, and inevitably, I mean, in every circumstance I experienced, he ultimately was right. Nobody's 100% right, nobody's 100% wrong. It's somewhere in the middle. It's probably the best outcome. In this case, just blending the two made this perfect center. So that's great.
Yeah. So and I think those are the things that I think people, when they get anointed into becoming a manager, need to work on and develop. And so what I'm trying to do is the book's part of it, but I'm going to start doing, as I retire, I'm going to start formally coaching people and taking on the task. Because I think what I want to give back is everything that all of my mentors gave to me that
Hmm.
I know I can help people with.
Yeah,
And and to me, I think, well, even in my job today, I have a responsibility to the company to be training the next set of managers. And so,
agreed.
and so I'm going to just take that and parlay that to the outside and just say, "Hey, it's my job to find the next set of leaders."
Yeah, very good. Well, let's move on. I guess we're up to number 4 now.
I think we did we cover focus. We covered focus.
Focus,
Oh, we didn't
stability.
cover compassion.
Yeah.
I combined compassion with empathy, but compassion is really showing the person. I think leaders have trouble with both empathy and compassion because I don't think they fully understand them, and I think they're afraid to tackle them. And both require skill. But in compassion, you potentially can help the person solve the problem or prevent the problem from happening. And the best story I have for that was when I was in seventh grade. I grew up, my dad was former military, and I grew up in a family that we didn't support fighting within the family. And I had also lost a brother in the Vietnam War, which impacted the family. And I got in a fight at school in seventh grade. A young man had moved into the town, was a bully, and he was picking on a young lady in the class and pushing and shoving her.
Mm.
And I stood up and I walked over and I told him he needed to stop and to go sit down. He proceeded to take a swing at me, which unfortunately prompted a swing back, and he ended up across the teacher's desk. We both got sent down to the principal's office. The principal sat there and said, the school district has a new policy. Anybody who fights on school grounds will get suspended. You boys are both getting a one-day suspension. She proceeded to say some other things, and then she dismissed the other boy. And then I'm sitting there saying, oh my God, what's coming next? She sat there and she said to me, she said, look, I don't want to suspend you, but I don't have a choice. You did what I would have wanted you to do in that classroom. You defended a weaker person. She said, I am going to personally call your father and explain to him that you didn't do anything wrong, even though the letter says you did. She then told me that, unfortunately, that letter, a copy of it would go in my school record and would follow me to college. Well, a couple of things happened. First off, that letter was never in my file when I got to high school. When I got home, my mom was there. I handed her the letter. She read it and sat down, and I knew it made her emotionally upset. She said, why don't you go upstairs till your dad comes home? As I was going up the stairs to my bedroom, the phone rang, and it was the principal. And I could hear my mom talking to her and saying, yes, Mrs. Usinowitz, yes, my husband will be home shortly, blah, blah. My dad eventually comes home from work. I hear him in the kitchen. I hear some grumbling between my mom and him. And then he calls for me to come down. I was fearing for my life when I walked into that kitchen. And I sat down and he said, look, he said, I don't agree with fighting. You lost a brother to fighting. You know the rules. And I said, yes, sir. He said, okay, now that we have that out of the way, what are you going to do tomorrow? I said, well, I can't go to school. I guess I'll be grounded. I'll be in my room. He said, no, what do you really want to do tomorrow? I said, Dad, I don't know what you're asking. I got suspended. He said, yes, but the principal also said, you did what she would have wanted you to do. And you did what I would want you to do if you saw somebody being taken advantage of who was weaker. So I think there's an exception to the rule that we never considered. So what do you want to do fun tomorrow? I said, I'll go fishing. He said, I think that's a great idea. Just don't go near the schoolyard. To me, that's compassion. That principal did not have to do that. But she knew my family, and she knew my dad, and she knew that dad was strict. And, you know, my parents never beat us. I want to be clear to the audience. We were never hit. Mom would threaten us with the little ruler, but she never struck anybody. I broke a rule. And that principal did not have to step out of her comfort zone and make a very uncomfortable phone call on my behalf. She saved me a lot of pain and anguish. That's compassion.
Well, I think it's indicative of a big challenge that leaders face. There is frequently the letter of the law about thou shalt not and dot dot dot. And the challenge, and back to my thing on the art and science of leadership, there are so many things that you as a leader are going to be faced with deciding, because often in a role of authority, you become kind of judge, jury, and prosecutor of a matter that's going on, and you have to think about that. And is there a greater good? Is there some element of a greater good that creates a technical violation of the letter of the law, that whatever line item is involved, but really for the greater good, is there a need for a severe sentence? There's a
Right.
temporary sentence to comply with the letter of the laws, so the principal had to give you the 1 day suspension. But the bigger picture was the protection of a young lady that was faced with a very bad situation. And yeah, it creates a great conundrum for leaders. And there are those that I've seen that take the position, and it's more of a CYA decision, and that is, I'm going to follow the letter of the law. I'm not going to think about all that other stuff because it's technically not what the law says I'm supposed to do. And I get accused of that. Quite frankly, we have a joke in my family about me being the crossing guard at school. And that's a true story. I was, but it connotes a certain mentality about policy and procedure. But I've frequently been faced with that same kind of challenge of, you look at the greater good that's being served in the action that might have tripped the wire on some kind of technical violation.
Hmm. Absolutely.
And it's a tough call to make, and it's not for the faint of heart to, deal with something like that, but certainly a cautionary tale that's a good one. Yep.
Yep.
All right, next point. What else in the pillar there?
So I think we've covered the pillars, but one of the things I want to make sure that I mention to people is having a mentor or multiple mentors. And I write about that in the book as because I don't see that happening a lot. I was lucky enough to work for some large organizations that had mentorship programs and required leaders to mentor younger people in younger roles. I'm not making an age statement, but people who may be new to the company, but they're new to a role and they need to kind of learn the culture of the company. And I learned so much from these people. And I see today that a lot of people don't have that direction. And so I want people to be encouraged. It's okay to approach somebody and say, "Hey, would you like to be my mentor?" And I guarantee you, any decent manager or leader out there would step up for that opportunity to be able to help someone else grow and develop. And so currently where I work, we don't have a formal program for that, but there are a couple of people who have come to me and said, "Would you mentor me?" And I've said yes. And I don't think I've ever told anybody no. But the reality is, I think it is such a key part of development of yourself that it warranted a place in the book,
Yeah.
in addition to the six pillars.
Well, you're preaching to the choir on this show because, as many of my listeners know, I am a big advocate of mentorship. I was raised the only child of a single mom, and she had the wisdom for me as a young boy to surround me with mentors. And in third grade, I had people that were coming alongside and doing things. I mean, starting with scout leaders and on up, and she was the one asking people to step in and do things. And I learned that as just a very natural way of growing and existing. And when I got to college, I was not afraid to walk up to somebody and say, I respect what you do here, this thing that you seem to be expert at doing. Can you tell me more about that? And there's what I caution my own clients to do. I do encourage them to ask, as you described. Go in your company, find the leaders that you respect, and ask them if they'll spend some time. But don't make it this giant undefined scope, because that's overwhelming, and nobody's really going to sign on for that. But if you can be a little specific and say, I love the way you work a room. Can you show me some of that? Can you explain that to me? Or I love the way you handle tense situations, or I love the way you make people feel, just something pretty specific. If you can approach them with that part of your ask for mentorship, the worst answer you're probably going to get is yes, but not now. Yes, but I'm deep in the weeds on a certain initiative. I just don't have another minute in my calendar, but I will do that for you, at a later date. And to your point, Jim, the good leaders are more than willing to do that, to help in that development of others. Absolutely agreed.
Yep. And it's part of that giving back
Right.
and helping the next generation get prepared.
I agree.
So
Yeah, totally. Well, Jim, tell folks the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more about your work.
So they can reach out to me a couple of ways. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. They can reach out to me via my website, which is just www.jimcarlough, all one word, no spaces or anything, .com. However, if you're okay with this, I would like to give away a couple of free books.
Great.
So I'm always looking for feedback. And so I would like to hear from your listeners what they got or didn't get out of today's discussion. And so for the first 3 or 5 people who post to the social media where you post this episode that make a comment, please, listeners, do not put your address in social media. Just have your name. We'll reach back out to you, and we will get your that contact information, your mailing address, and I will send you a signed copy of my book. And then you won't have to buy it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or off of my website. But
That's great.
It's actually been working quite well, and the feedback has been very positive, and also some people who have also offered suggestions, and which means I may have to write a next book.
Well, nothing wrong with that. All right, Jim. Well, thank you so much for sitting in. This has been very helpful, and your own version of a 6-pillar leadership framework. I love it. Well, folks, we're going to have that info that Jim mentioned, the links in the show notes. So as always, hop down and check out that information. This is the part of the show I like to remind you, we've got a video version of this over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Check out our archives there. Leave us a comment. Give us a thumbs up or thumbs down. I like Jim's point. Tell us what you like, tell us what you didn't like, and we'll certainly take that under consideration. But for now, I think we're done for the day. We're going to sign off. Go out there and make it a great one.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.